The fluorescent lights in the courtroom flickered twice before they steadied, and that was the exact moment my sister leaned over to her husband and said, loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear, "I told you she'd show up in costume." She meant the robe. My judicial robe. Black, plain. The kind you can buy from any legal supply catalog for $90. Except mine had a small embroidered seal on the left breast that she couldn't read from where she sat, and wouldn't have understood if she could. She thought I'd worn it to be dramatic. She thought I'd worn it to make her custody hearing about me. I hadn't told anybody in my family what I did for a living. Not really. Not in any way that stuck. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because the look on her face when the bailiff said the words that ended all of it, that came later. That came after 11 years of being the family disappointment, the one who left, the one who got too big for the town she came from. To understand why a single sentence drained the blood out of my brother-in-law's face that morning, you have to go back to a kitchen in Colton, West Virginia, and a Sunday dinner where I was 19 years old and announced I was leaving for law school. My name is Priscilla Hatcher, though back home everyone called me Prissy, which I hated, and which my father used like a small, affectionate weapon every time he wanted to remind me I was still just his little girl who didn't know anything yet. We lived at the dead end of Sugar Run Road in a house my grandfather built with his own hands out of lumber from the mill where he lost 2 fingers. Colton is the kind of town where the same 40 families have lived for 4 generations, where everybody knows whose truck is whose by the sound of the engine, and where leaving, actually leaving, not just going to Charleston for the day, is treated as a quiet betrayal. My father ran a small engine repair shop off Route 9. Lawnmowers, chainsaws, the occasional ATV. He had grease worked so deep into the creases of his hands that no amount of lava soap ever got it all the way out. My mother kept the books for him and taught Wednesday night Bible study and made the best apple stack cake in 3 counties. And my younger sister Tansy was the pretty one, the easy one, the one who stayed. I was the one who read at the dinner table. I remember the night I told them. We were having pork chops and fried apples, and I'd been holding the news in my chest for 2 weeks like a hot coal. I'd gotten into the law program at the state university with a scholarship that covered most of it. I'd worked 2 jobs the whole summer to cover the rest. I thought, God help me, I actually thought they'd be proud. Law school, my father repeated, setting down his fork. Not angry. Worse than angry. Bewildered, like I'd announced I was going to the moon to open a hardware store. Lawyers, he said, and the way he said it, you'd have thought the word tasted bad. Prissy, lawyers are the people who took the Codill's land. Lawyers are the ones who showed up when your Uncle Verl got hurt at the mine and made sure he got nothing. You want to be one of them. I want to be the kind that's on the other side of that, I said. He shook his head slowly. There ain't another side. There's just them and us, and you're fixing to go stand with them. My mother didn't say anything. She got up and started clearing plates that weren't finished. Tansy, who was 16 then, looked at me across the table and rolled her eyes. And I'll never forget what she muttered. She always has to be better than everybody. I left for school 3 weeks later. My father shook my hand at the bus station like I was a stranger he was doing a favor for. My mother cried but wouldn't say why. Nobody said they were proud. Nobody said come back. They just let me go, the way you let go of a balloon you've decided isn't worth chasing. Law school was the hardest thing I had ever done, and I want to be honest about that, because for a long time afterward people would say, "Oh, you're so smart, it must have come easy." And it never came easy. Not one day of it. I worked nights at a diner near campus, the kind of place where truckers came in at 3 in the morning, and you learned to read a man's whole bad week off the way he ordered his eggs. I studied in the walk-in cooler in my breaks because it was the only quiet place. My first semester, I got a C in contracts and cried in a library bathroom for an hour, convinced I'd proved my father right. There was a Professor Adaisy Nwosu, who'd come up from nothing herself in a way she never fully explained, who pulled me aside after that first exam. She didn't tell me I was brilliant. She told me something better. She said, You read these cases like a mechanic, Ms. Hatcher. You take them apart to see how they fail. Don't lose that. The polished ones in the front row, they read for the answer. You read for the break. That's worth more than you think. I held on to that for 11 years. I want to tell you about those 11 years, but the truth is most of them were just work. Long, unglamorous, grinding work. I clerked for a county judge after I passed the bar. I took a job at a small firm doing the kind of cases nobody wants. Disability appeals, evictions fought from the tenant's side, a coal company that had let toxins seep into a hollow's well water for a decade and called it an act of God. I wasn't getting rich. I drove a 10-year-old Honda and rented the top floor of a house owned by a widow who fed me dinner on Sundays because she said I worked too hard to cook. But I was good. I was good in a way that surprised even me. I could stand in front of a jury made up of people exactly like my parents, guarded, suspicious of anybody in a suit, and I could speak to them in their own language, because it was my language too. I'd watch the wariness leave their faces when they realized I wasn't talking down to them. I won cases I had no business winning, and after about 7 years, the governor's office called. They were looking to appoint a new circuit judge for a district that covered 6 rural counties, including, as it happened, the one I'd grown up in. They wanted someone who understood those places, someone who wouldn't treat a man in a Carhartt jacket like a lesser kind of citizen. I was 31 years old when I took the oath. I didn't tell my family. I want to explain that, because I know how it sounds. It sounds petty. But it wasn't pettiness, or not only that. The last real conversation I'd had with my father, 4 years earlier, had ended with him saying, "I don't know what you are anymore, but you ain't ours." We'd been arguing about why I missed Tansey's wedding. I'd been in the middle of a trial, a child custody case, and I literally could not leave. But he heard I chose work over family, and there was no unhearing it for him. After that, the calls got shorter, and then they stopped. My mother and I exchanged Christmas cards. That was it. That was the whole relationship by the time I put on a robe for the first time. So when I say a single sentence in a courtroom drained the color out of my brother-in-law's face, I need you to understand the distance I'm talking about. These were people who genuinely did not know what I had become. To them, I was still Prissy, who'd run off to be one of them. The phone call that started everything came on a Tuesday in March. It was my mother. I almost didn't recognize her number. She'd gotten a new phone. Her voice was thin and frightened in a way I'd never heard, and my whole body went cold before she even finished the first sentence. Because a mother only sounds like that about one thing. "It's Tansey," she said. "And the baby. The little one. Honey, it's bad." It took me 20 minutes to get the whole story out of her, because she kept apologizing. Was its own kind of strange, and circling back. Here is what I finally understood. My sister Tansey had married a man named Brock Dillard 6 years earlier. Charming, everybody said. Good-looking, drove a nice truck, always picked up the check. He'd come from over in the next county and nobody knew his people, which in Colton should have been a warning, but Tansey was 24 and lonely and he made her laugh. The charm didn't last. I'd hear pieces of it secondhand over the years, through my mother's careful Christmas cards. Tansey's having a hard time, Tansey and Brock are going through something, the kind of soft language families use to wrap around things too sharp to hold directly. What it actually was, I'd learn later, was control. The slow, deliberate kind. He took over her phone. He decided which of her friends she could see, which came down to none. He moved them an hour away from her parents to a trailer on land his cousin owned, where there was no neighbor close enough to hear anything. And there was a little girl. My niece. Her name was Posey. She was 4 years old, and I had never met her. That's the part that still sits in my chest like a stone. I had a niece I had never met, because I had let 11 years of hurt feelings keep me away, and now my mother was on the phone telling me that Brock had filed for full custody of that little girl and was on the verge of getting her, and that Tansey had nobody, no money, no lawyer, no friends he hadn't isolated her from, and a court date in 9 days. He told her no judge in this county would ever side with a woman who can't even hold a job, my mother said. And the lawyer they gave her, the free one, he met with her for 15 minutes. 15 minutes, Prissy. He told her to just agree to weekends and be grateful. I was standing in my kitchen. I remember I had a dish towel in my hand and I kept twisting it. Mama, I said, why are you calling me? There was a long silence on the line, and then my mother said the thing that broke something open in me. Because your daddy doesn't know who else can help. And I told him, I said, our Prissy went and learned the law. And he got real quiet and then he said, call her. Even if she won't pick up, call her. Even if she won't pick up, call her. After 11 years. That's what it took. Here is where I have to confess something, and it's not flattering. My first feeling, before the love, before the protectiveness, before any of the things a good person is supposed to feel, my first feeling was a bitter little flicker of vindication. Now you need me. Now that I'm useful. I'm not proud of it, but I've promised myself I'd tell this straight, and that ugliness was real. And it lasted about 4 seconds, and then I thought about a 4-year-old girl I'd never met being handed to a man who treated her mother like property, and the bitterness just burned off like fog. Mama, I said, listen to me very carefully. Do not let Tansy agree to anything. Do not let her sign anything. I'll be there tomorrow. You can't get off work that easy, honey, Mama, I said. I am the work. I drove down the next morning. 6 hours, most of it through country that got more familiar and more painful the closer I got. The same sheets where I'd bought gas the day I left for school, the same ridge lines, the same churches with the same plastic letter signs out front. I hadn't been back in over 4 years. My parents' house looked smaller. Everything looks smaller when you come back. My father was on the porch when I pulled up, and he stood when he saw the car, but he didn't come down the steps. And for a second, we just looked at each other across the yard. Two people who'd spent over a decade being wrong about each other in different directions. He looked old. That was the thing that undid me. The man I'd been fighting in my head all these years was strong and certain and a little cruel. And the man on the porch was just old, with thin gray hair and hands that shook a little. And when I came up the steps, he didn't hug me. We weren't a hugging family. But he put his hand on my shoulder, heavy and rough, and he said, thank you for coming. Just that. And it was enough to nearly knock me down. Tansy was inside, and when I saw her, I almost didn't recognize her either. She'd always been the pretty one, but she'd gone gaunt and flinchy, the way people get when they've spent years bracing for the next bad thing. She was holding Posy on her lap, and Posy looked at me with my own father's serious, dark eyes, this tiny, solemn person who'd been the subject of a custody filing she couldn't understand, and she said, are you the aunt who lives in the city? I am, I said. My voice did something complicated. Mama says you're real smart. Your mama, I said, getting down on the floor in front of her, is about to find out just how smart. I spent the next 8 days doing the thing I am best at in the world, which is taking something apart to see how it fails. The first thing I did was fire the public defender, politely, in writing, and enter as Tansy's counsel myself. Now, I couldn't preside over her case. I was a sitting judge in that very circuit, which meant I'd have to recuse from anything that came before my own bench and disclose my relationship to the parties. But there are 6 counties in my district and several judges, and a family law matter like this would go before a colleague of mine, Judge Marlowe Quist, a careful and decent man I'd known for years. I could not be Tansy's judge, but there was no rule on God's earth that said I couldn't be her lawyer. And Brock Dillard had no idea. That was the part I kept turning over, because here is what I learned in those 8 days. Sitting at my mother's kitchen table with Tansy walking me through 6 years of a marriage in flat, exhausted detail. Brock had been very, very careful. He had built his whole case on the story that Tansy was unstable, unemployable, a bad mother. He'd documented everything that made her look weak and hidden everything he'd done to make her that way. He'd kept her off the lease, off the bank accounts, out of the workforce, and then pointed at all of it and said, "Look, she has nothing. She is nothing. It's a common playbook." I'd seen it from the bench a dozen times, and it makes me sick every single time. But careful men get arrogant. That's the break, almost always. Brock was so confident the system would side with him, the man with the truck and the steady job and the smooth way of talking to officials, that he'd gotten sloppy. He'd sent text messages, hundreds of them. Tansy still had an old phone he didn't know about, deactivated but never wiped, sitting in a shoebox in her mother's closet. And on that phone was every threat he'd ever made in writing. "No court will believe you. I will make sure you never see her. You're lucky I let you stay." 6 years of a man documenting his own control, because he never once imagined the woman he'd convinced was worthless would walk into a courtroom with someone who knew exactly how to use it. I'm not going to pretend the next part was a movie. Custody cases aren't fireworks. They're paperwork and waiting and a knot in your stomach that doesn't go away. I filed motions. I subpoenaed the financial records that showed Brock had been hiding income while claiming Tansy contributed nothing. I got a forensic specialist, a friend from law school who owed me one, to authenticate the text messages. I lined up Tansy's old high school friends, the ones Brock had cut off, to testify about the woman she'd been before him. I did, in 8 days, the work that 15-minute lawyer should have done in 8 weeks. And I never filed my own name on the public docket in a way that announced who I was. As far as Brock and his attorney knew, Tansy had scraped together some out-of-town legal aid. A nobody. They didn't bother to look closer. Arrogant men never do. The hearing was on a Thursday morning in the Buchanan County Courthouse, a building I'd walked into 100 times as a judge, but never once through the front doors as a private citizen. My family came. All of them. My father in the only suit he owned, the one he got married in and buried his brother in. My mother gripping her purse with both hands. They sat in the gallery behind Tansy, and I saw Brock and his lawyer on the other side, relaxed, leaned back, a man who'd already spent the win in his head. Brock saw me at the counsel table and didn't think anything of it, just some woman in a robe. And yes, I'll explain the robe, because that's the part Tansy's husband never understood, and the part my own sister had sneered at me about an hour earlier, when she was too frightened to know what she was looking at. I wore my judicial robe to that hearing, and I did it on purpose, and it was completely proper. When a sitting judge appears as counsel, which is rare but allowed in our state, with disclosure, there is a question of how to present yourself. I disclosed my judgeship to Judge Quist and to opposing counsel in a written filing 3 days before, exactly as the rules require. The robe wasn't a costume. It was the truth, worn openly. But Brock's lawyer, a sloppy man from 2 counties over, hadn't read his own file carefully, and Brock had told my sister I was playing dress-up, and my sister, who still didn't fully understand, had repeated it that morning loud enough for the front rows to hear. Judge Quist took the bench. We did the preliminaries. And then, before the evidence even began, Judge Quist did the thing that the rules required him to do. The thing I had disclosed, and he had to put on the record. He looked at the courtroom and he said, "Before we proceed, the court notes for the record a disclosure filed by petitioner's counsel. Counsel for the mother is the Honorable Priscilla Hatcher, who sits as a circuit judge in this very district. She is properly recused from any role on the bench in this matter and appears today solely as private counsel. The court finds no conflict. Proceed." I have spent my whole life learning to keep a flat face. I kept it then. But I watched Brock Dillard's color drain out of him in real time. I watched it travel down his face like water going out of a sink. As the word judge landed and rearranged everything he thought he knew about the morning. His lawyer leaned over and started whispering fast. Brock's mouth opened and closed, and behind me, in the gallery, I heard my sister Tansy make a small broken sound, and my father, who told me there was only them and us, and I'd gone to stand with them, said, not quietly enough, in a voice cracked wide open, "That's my girl. That's my Prissy." I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I'd turned around, I would have lost the flat face entirely. So I just stood up and I buttoned the front of the robe and I said, "Thank you, Your Honor. The petitioner is ready." I won't walk you through every minute of that hearing, but I'll tell you it wasn't cruel and it wasn't a spectacle, because I learned a long time ago that the most devastating thing you can do to a man like Brock is simply, calmly, let the truth speak in its own voice. I entered the texts. I put up the financial records. I let his own words about making sure she never saw her daughter hang in the air of that quiet room. I asked him 3 questions on cross-examination, and he hanged himself on everyone, because men who've never been told no don't know how to lie under pressure. By the time I sat down, the case Brock had spent 6 years building was just gone. Not dramatically. It just dissolved, the way a story does when the facts underneath it finally show. Judge Quist awarded primary custody to Tansy, with supervised visitation for Brock pending a review, and ordered the financial disclosures that would eventually unwind every lie about who'd been supporting that household. Posey was going home with her mother. Outside the courthouse, on the wide stone steps where I'd seen so many families fall apart and occasionally come back together, my family stood in a loose, uncertain knot, none of us quite knowing how to be with each other after so long. It was my father who moved first. He came over to me, this old man in his wedding suit, and he reached out and took my hand. Not to shake it, just to hold it, his rough, grease-stained fingers around mine. And he looked down at it like he was seeing it for the first time. "I told you lawyers took things," he said, and his voice wasn't steady. "I never once thought one of them could give something back." "I'm still ours, Daddy," I said. "I never stopped being ours." He nodded, and he couldn't say anything else, and that was all right. Some men say everything they've got in a single sentence and spend the rest of their lives meaning it. Tansy hugged me hard, the way she hadn't since we were girls, and whispered into my shoulder that she was sorry. Sorry for everything. Sorry for what she said when we were kids, and sorry for the years in between. And little Posey, my niece, the solemn, dark-eyed reason all of us were standing in the sun on those steps, tugged on the hem of my robe and asked if she could touch the gold seal on the front. And I knelt down and let her, and she traced it with one small finger and said, very seriously, "Are you a judge for real?" "For real," I said. "Can a girl be that?" And something about the way she asked it, the genuine uncertainty in it, the same uncertainty I'd carried into a kitchen in Colton at 19 years old, landed somewhere very deep. "A girl can be anything she's willing to work twice as hard for," I told her. "And you, baby, you come from a long line of women who know how to work." Things changed after that, the way real things change, slowly, unevenly, with backsliding. My father started calling me on Sundays. At first, the calls were short and awkward and mostly about the weather, but they got longer. He asked me about my cases. He started watching court shows on television and then complaining to me about how wrong they got everything, which is its own form of love. My mother told her Bible study group about her daughter, the judge, so many times that the other women started asking after me by name. Tansy went back to school. She's training to be a paralegal now, of all things, and she calls me with questions she could look up herself, just to have a reason to call. And I let her, because I understand now that connection is sometimes just the questions you don't really need to ask. In Posey, I see Posey all the time. She is 6 now, fierce and funny and obsessed with the idea of rules. Who makes them, who follows them, what happens when they're broken. And last month when I drove down to visit, she'd set up a court in my parents' living room and appointed herself the judge and her stuffed rabbit the defendant, and she banged a wooden spoon on the coffee table and the whole family laughed until we couldn't breathe. I used to think the point of all that work, the diner shifts and the cold library bathrooms and the 11 lonely years, was to prove my father wrong, to win some argument we'd had over pork chops when I was 19. And for a long time, the not being believed sat in me like a splinter you can't dig out. But I was wrong about what I was working for. I wasn't building a case against my family. I was building something my niece could trace with one small finger and ask, "Can a girl be that? The quiet ones? The long roads? The years nobody claps for. They don't make sense while you're walking them. They only make sense looking back, when you finally see what they were carrying you toward. My father has a picture on his mantle now. It's not of me at my swearing in. He never came to that, and we don't talk about it. It's a photo Tansy took on the courthouse steps that Thursday. Me in my robe, my father holding my hand and looking down at it, both of us caught in the middle of becoming people we should have been to each other a long time ago. He told me last time I was home that it's the first thing he points to when anybody comes by. That's my daughter, he says. She learned the law. And then, every time, the same thing. Quieter, like he's still a little surprised the world let it be true. She came home when it counted. For 11 years, I thought I was building a case against my father. Every late shift at that diner, every hour I spent shivering in a walk-in cooler with a contracts book, I told myself I was gathering evidence to prove him wrong about that night over pork chops when he said lawyers only take things away from people like us. I wanted to win the argument. And the strange thing is, I never did win it. Not the way I'd imagined. I won something better, and it took my niece's custody hearing to show me the difference. Here is what I understand now that I couldn't see at 19. The reason that one sentence drained the color out of Brock's face wasn't luck, and it wasn't drama. It was cause and effect, stretched across a decade. Brock got sloppy because no one had ever held him accountable, and I was ready because I had spent years being told I wasn't enough and choosing to get better anyway. Two paths met in that courtroom, and the one built on patient, honest work was always going to be the stronger one. That isn't fate. That's just what happens when you keep doing the right thing while no one is watching. I think a lot now about the 3 things that actually carried me through. The first was refusing to cut corners even when cutting corners would have been easier, staying on the side of the people who get stepped on, the way I did with that family whose well water got poisoned, the way I did for Tansy. The second was learning to take things apart to see how they really work, the way Professor Nusu taught me. Because clear thinking is the only thing that ever beats a confident lie. And the third, the one I'm proudest of, was the plain stubbornness to keep going through the sea in contracts, through the years my own family wouldn't say they were proud. Through 6 lonely hours of driving back to a town I swore I'd never return to. You cannot fake your way into a moment like the one on those courthouse steps. You can only arrive there, slowly, by becoming someone worth arriving as. So if you take one thing from Posey tracing that gold seal with her small finger and asking whether a girl could be that, let it be this. Do the work nobody claps for. Treat the people the world overlooks like they matter, because they do. Sharpen your mind until you can see the break in any story that doesn't hold. And when the years get long and quiet and no one believes in what you're building yet, keep building. The recognition, if it ever comes last and matters least. What matters is the kind of person you've made yourself into by the time it does. My father needed 40 years to say that's my girl. I'd have waited 40 more.